SACOG Strategic Planning Committee. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Director Frericks?
I am here.
Thank you. Gore absent. Harris?
Here.
Kozlowski?
Here.
Sander?
Here.
Zaragoza?
Here.
Saylor?
Here.
Chenier absent. Stallard?
Here.
Vice Chair Kennedy?
Here.
And Chair Jennings is absent.
Thank you. At this time, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, do you have any messages you need to read?
Just a housekeeping reminder that if you are participating online, which I think we all are this afternoon, if we can just mute our devices when we're not speaking, and if you could please use the raise hand feature to make a comment or ask a question.
Thank you very much. And is there any public comment at this time or public communication? There
are no public communications.
Okay, then we will move on to item number 1, which is consent. Is there anyone on the board that has any questions regarding the consent, the one consent item, which is pretty self-explanatory that we do all the time? Nope. And do we have any public comment on this?
No public comment.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion.
Moved by Frericks.
Second.
Zaragoza.
Right.
Either way.
Moved by Frericks, second by Zaragoza. Please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Frericks?
Aye.
Gore, absent. Harris?
Yes.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Sander?
Aye.
Zaragoza?
Aye.
Saylor?
Aye.
Chenier, absent. Stallard?
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy?
Aye.
And Chair Jennings is absent. Motion carries. Thank you.
Our next 2 items are informational with number 2, the Executive Director Performance Evaluation Update. Mr. Corliss.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kennedy. Everybody can hear me okay. So for this item, this is simply the final step of the revised performance evaluation process that this committee has been overseeing, really providing input on for the first time last year, and obviously overseeing the overhaul and a pretty brand new process. Survey was sent out by Eric Douglas at LRI. We have some of those survey results. They were sent to committee members. I would say, generally speaking, seemed pretty positive in terms of all of your feedback and the board's feedback on the revised eval process. This is just simply an item that we said we would do to close all of this out and then get it into, basically making it more routine for next year. I would say, I think, given the new process, the Strategic Planning Committee is going to have continue to have a hand in next year in terms of my work plan, my evaluation, as you've always had. We're going to carry forward this revised evaluation process, and also more of an update on my own work plan and goals for the year. So again, I think pretty favorable responses that came back, but this is your chance to offer any other comments to wrap this up as we head into the next year's process for the evaluation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? I'm seeing no hands. See, James, if you hear something enough times, eventually people will stop asking questions. So, no, great job, I think, all the way around. And again, I want to thank board members for the high level of participation and responses. I think it was a good process. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this at this time?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Next item, please.
Next item is SACOG's draft strategic plan, and again presented by James Corliss.
Okay, again, thank you, Chair Kennedy. Okay, so this is your only other item this afternoon, and I hope you've all had a chance to review the draft update to the agency's strategic plan. I'm getting all kinds of, little dialogue boxes on my screen here. I'll do the best I can to ignore them. Okay, so just a reminder and a refresher. The last time we had an agency-wide strategic plan was actually 12 years ago in 2010. I would say, I've said at this committee a few times over the last 9 months. I think we've been doing strategic planning in a sort of an iterative way since I joined SACOG 5 years ago, in particular at your board retreats in 2017 and 2019 that were really intended to refine goals and priorities. There's a valid question about the relationship between a strategic plan and the region's long-range plan, sometimes known as the MTP-SCS, or in this next plan update cycle, the blueprint. You will see in the strategic plan, there are 4 strategies or priority areas that are really around growth and development and transportation and mobility and infrastructure. Pulled through from that, those 4 priority areas were in our plan, pulled through to the strategic plan because they are an expression of sort of what we do. There's been a lot of work, and part of the goal of this strategic plan is to really pull in some of our work, first really around economic prosperity and our regional prosperity strategy, and more recently with the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group and our racial equity work. And then for the board retreat in April, I think we had an excellent opportunity to really dive deep into the triple bottom line and the 3 E's of equity, economy, and environment. I know you've all heard this a lot by now, and hopefully with Vice Chair Kennedy's admonition, that means like it's sinking in, and there shouldn't be necessarily anything that's a huge surprise here. All right, let me try to. All right. Okay, so in terms of the kind of the key pieces of the strategic plan, and again, this is a draft. I'll tell you a little bit about where this goes from here. This is today really about getting your feedback. We have needed to update the mission statement. In my mind, the idea, among other things in the mission statement, is to make it short, to make it something we can remember. The one from 12 years ago was a little longer than I think mission statements ought to be. We've never had a vision statement, or we haven't had since the last 20 years of the agency. And so that obviously is something that you all had a chance to weigh in on, and we had a lunch in the beginning of August to talk a little bit about some of those ideas. Those priority areas I mentioned are pulled through from the last plan, and that really is the what. I know some of you have asked sort of like, where's the what in the mission and the vision? It comes through the priority areas, the 4 areas around growth and development and mobility, and making efficient use of the system and revitalizing infrastructure. We really wanted to make sure we crosswalked and tied in our more recent work on equity and racial equity. Love to get your feedback on the how. In other words, all this sounds great, but actually, how are we going to do it? And that's the sort of the last piece in the plan, and a single document to bring it all together. I want to offer a couple of things. I know this is a long one, and you all really, in some ways, as your role on the strategic planning committee here, it's because you're either the current board leadership or the former chairs of the agency, and you're veterans and you've been around. But I think it's important, nevertheless, to remind ourselves why we're here. Remind ourselves what a Council of Governments does. This is from the National Association of Regional Councils definition of COGS. There is no, of course, single definition, but it is important to remember that we are supposed to be a broad-based organization, adept at consensus building, partnership, services, problem solving. And I like this description of it, even if it's lengthy, but it's really, again, a reminder to the question for all of us, kind of why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Obviously, of the many hundreds of councils of governments that exist across the country, honestly, many of us are very different. We have different scopes. different areas of focus, which are in some ways, they come from, you know, how we were created, the problems we have been intending to solve, the gaps, right, that exist in sort of an ecosystem of regional government and nonprofits, if you will, and problem solvers. Another interesting just reflection and reminder is to go back to our bylaws, the most recent version of our bylaws, which were overhauled and updated in 2003. When I think one of the many things happened here, in addition to being in the middle of the blueprint process in this region, this is the time in which, as I remember and understand it, all the local governments basically came to the table. And I want to remind everybody how special it is to have a council of governments this big, covering this much land area, that has every single local government at the table twice a month. But this is a pretty interesting piece in our bylaws on purpose, that in 2003, when we came together as a region, these problems and issues to tackle are limited, such as not limited to transportation, air quality, water quality, land use, housing, and employment. I am not suggesting that we become the workforce specialists, because, you know, thankfully we have a lot of our partners that do those things. I'm not suggesting we tackle water quality or water availability or storage or anything else, because thankfully we have partners who do that. But what I will say is, if we just isolate ourselves into single issues, even if there's 2 or 3 of those single issues, and we don't see this broader vision, we will not be successful. So, and I'll bring up the plan, and we can kind of walk through that, and I'd love to get your comments back. But while I know on a parallel track here, I want to remind you all that the Racial Equity Action Plan was actually just discussed by our policy committee this morning. It'll be discussed by other 2 committees on Thursday. There's been a lot of input and listening sessions into our, and for good reason, to our Racial Equity Action Plan. This update to the strategic plan has also had quite a bit of input. Daniel Kaufman from Third Plateau did a lot of interviews with many of you on the board in February and March. I mentioned we had our board retreat. We've hit the city managers and county execs 2 times at least. We had a good SACOG staff retreat back in April. We discussed it at this committee on May the 9th. We had more staff input into our mission and vision statements. Staff was very involved in helping shape those, as you were earlier this month. We had that mission and vision rollout to the committees earlier this month. We are at today on August 29th. And from here, we would go over to the full board meeting on September 15th. And our hope and our intention is to have board adoption of this plan in October. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Let me ask this maybe of committee members. Would it be helpful if I shared the draft of the plan and to walk through that on the screen, or do you have it in front of you and you can navigate easily yourselves?
Just speaking for me, I have it in front of me, James.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Likewise.
Yeah, others?
I think on the screen is helpful.
Okay. Stand by. It's a dangerous thing when I'm in charge of screen sharing. Okay. All right. So here it is. Again, this is very draft. So you know, but the goal, in addition to having a short mission statement, was to have a short document. But I want to just I want to review some of the pieces to this plan, which are pretty traditional, but maybe not necessarily like your run-of-the-mill strategic plan. So vision and mission is key, and we've reviewed these through the committees. The vision statement: a vibrant and thriving Sacramento region for all. A mission statement: SACOG convenes and connects the region to advance an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future We had a lot of discussion on that mission statement and a couple of different options at your committees and the lunch earlier this month. From here, we get into the triple bottom line and the goals that we really dug into, and I thought got really good feedback on, both at your board retreat in Clarksburg on April the 8th, but also, if you remember, we had quite a bit of work and maybe a few months, perhaps, since you've seen these, maybe not, but remember too, I think we had a lot of good discussion around the blueprint policy framework, and this is, again, it should be familiar to you in as much as both that you've discussed the triple bottom line, but also the articulation of these 3 E's really comes a lot from the blueprint policy framework. Again, not to say that we don't want your feedback today. We want your feedback on sort of how this all looks. I mentioned priority areas. These are really an articulation and very almost consistent with the priority areas in our long-range plan, because while I said many COGS and even our JPA bylaws has a pretty broad scope for the kinds of problems that back in 2003 and all the way to present, I think, the policymakers and the decision makers in the region saw this Council of Governments as having. These really are our focus areas. These are the places that you all have come to know us. And it is a mixture, of course, of land use and housing and development in terms of vibrant places. Again, these will also track to the blueprint principles from 20 years ago that are still still with us today. Looking at the next generation of mobility solutions in terms of providing more choices, but also kind of rethinking some of the role of traditional service providers, thinking a little bit more about innovation and public-private partnerships, and trying to be creative in problem solving for mobility challenges. Priority 3 being modernizing the way we pay for transportation infrastructure, because price signals are key. I want to remind you too that in your last long-range plan in 2020, you adopted for the first time some assumptions around actually switching out the gas tax, because it will be going away over the horizon of this long-range plan, and putting in a more market-based price signal to raise revenues. And then finally, sorry, I'm going back and forth and up and down here in 2 columns, but building a safe, equitable, and resilient transportation system, really reinvesting in infrastructure that is failing, that is aging, and that is unsafe. And then finally, the piece I mentioned, and then I'll wrap and get your comments. This last piece here, which I personally think is so very important, which is, and we heard a lot of this, by the way, through a lot of your comments too. At your board retreat in April, I reflected on some of the quotes that we heard from you in the one-on-one interviews, really talking about how in many ways, SACOG is the place to provide you a voice. SACOG is the place where we have to actually build our influence at the state level and the federal level, and how important those kinds of things are. So just to finish here on these pieces. So data and analysis, we went back and forth even among staff on, are we in our mission statement a data-driven organization? We certainly know we are a data-driven organization. It's one of our strengths and competencies. But we thought this is the place really to actually pull this through and highlight it here. And by the way, when we go through these, as we try to articulate in this draft, this is to say, we believe the ecosystem of regional agencies and community organizations actually need to build these strengths. And it is not to say that as an agency, we are necessarily strong in all of these areas. It is that we think these are the key ingredients for us to be effective and successful. So data analysis, collaboration, which I understand is sometimes easy to say and actually hard to do and to execute. But we know that we need to be in partnership, both with our partner agencies, our local government members, as well as a lot of our nonprofit and community-based organizations and private sector partners. We want to put a big emphasis on inclusion. And again, there's many ways to define that. We are trying to tie that back to a lot of the themes in our racial equity action plan. And this is one I would say that this is not necessarily a strength right now, but it is something that we feel is essential to build upon and to build. And you'll see a lot of those themes if you haven't already in our racial equity action plan. And then finally, to round it out, I mentioned influence already. I think maybe that's self-evident, but we need to punch above our weight. We need to have a synergistic relationship among our 28 local jurisdictions and all of our partner agencies. And we have to do better. We have to put ourselves on the radar and on the map of our state and federal funding partners. I will say the investment piece here actually, I think is there's a piece missing, honestly, just in this draft, but that was the first sentence of how important it is for us to be an investment-ready region and for us to play a role making sure that we get the right kinds of investment and we get the return on that investment. It's not just all dollars, it's actually about investing those dollars wisely. And finally, a nod to innovation. And when I say that, I don't typically mean just technology. And I think this is another important one. Innovation in our minds is really about trying to come up with creative solutions to attack problems creatively, to really elevate low cost and non-traditional solutions. Because for as much as we need to build our influence and we need to bring more investment to the region, we are not going to be able to have enough of the funding that we desire for all the projects we say we want. And so we have to be strategic, we have to set priorities, and we have to think of things in the transportation space that are actually increasing mobility and increasing capacity without necessarily trying to advance the more expensive capital projects, but to be smarter about using our existing network and reinvesting in our existing system. So I know that's a lot. I hope it was building on a chance for you to actually review the document and think about it. And I would love to get some discussion and feedback.
Looks like Director Saylor.
Thanks, Patrick. James, I really appreciate you laying out the timeline of activities that have happened before and those yet to happen. I think that helps to ground this work, and the document itself, I think, is aligned with the conversations. This is not really, it's working because it's not a surprise to see the material arrayed in this manner. And that's where it should be. At this point, we should see the footprints and the framework that we've laid out together. So as we do this incremental, iterative decision making, I think this is a good example of that. I have two sort of comments around wording, and that's pretty much it, because I think that I do think this captures the work that we've been doing together. The two comments are on the priorities. Where it says build, number one, build vibrant places for today's and tomorrow's residents. That phrasing is fairly awkward, I think. So there are two suggestions. One is just stop it, build vibrant places. Just lose that last phrase. Or if we want to say tomorrow and today and tomorrow, say the residents of today and tomorrow, something like that, because it's a possessive is a bit awkward. The second topic, and it's sort of these are minor points in some ways, but the second one is on the how will we be effective. I like this pattern of using the phrases for equity, economy, and environment, and I think you almost got it in the how to be effective with all of them except the first two. But on those two, I think it does make some sense for ease of repetition and memory to have data and analysis maybe captured in the title as information. So we provide information that is based on the data and analysis. So consider the title of that paragraph being information. The second one on collaboration, everybody knows that it's a word that unfortunately has been so overused and so drug through the mud that I think it's loses its impact. So it may be maybe integration or interaction. Integration is a word that appeals to me in there. Obviously, these are not going to make or break a vote on this action, but I think those might be worthy of consideration. And thanks for your patience. And I think good job for everybody.
Any others? I have a extremely minor wordsmith for almost the last word of the document, and just about a vibrant and thriving Sacramento for all. Probably should say Sacramento region. I'm sure that my friends in YOLO would agree with that. Okay.
And
That's a good thing for the-
twist our arm. We were thinking of maybe changing that to the YOLO region, but
Yeah, there we go.
Very, very good catch. Very good catch.
Any other comments or questions?
I do have a comment about the mission statement itself. The one phrase or two phrases. It says SACOG convenes and connects the region to advance an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm a Neanderthal, but I think mission statements should capture some of the fundamental substance of what an organization does. So when someone asks the question, what is SACOG? And they look at the mission statement, they have a practical idea of what that is. So right now, that mission statement, I think you could put Amazon in there. Amazon connects the region to advance equitable, sustainable, and prosperous futures. You could put a healthcare system in there. You could put another government agency in there. The mission statement sounds too generic to me. When we know, because if you look at all the priorities thereafter, everything's referring to transportation. That's the word for me that's somehow missing in this. It doesn't point out that we are a transportation agency in any way.
well, David, I think the comment, if I could, Pat,
That's
Patrick,
Oh.
is I think that we are more than that. I think we have more tools than that, and we do more than that. If we were only transportation, we only have one committee, the transportation committee. We have land use and we have the policy and innovation. We've always had a broader mission than just that. I think the mission, I like it because it talks about why we do this. What is our purpose? And then when we get to the priorities and the ways of achieving them, that's where I think we get into more of the kind of substance that you're asking for. Does that make sense?
It does, but I view most of the substance you're referring to as things that are related to transportation. That's still the core central goal. I think when we did a COG activity of buying things together, trying to find a way to essentially purchase things, that's probably not a transportation role, but I'm struggling a little bit to come up with other examples of that.
Well, we did some work on emergency response and fire issues. We do a lot of air quality stuff. We do the housing plan always.
But that just determines how we fund transportation.
Well, it's more than just transportation, I think. But anyway, I think I understand your point, and it's one that we talk about a lot. I think this is thread the needle pretty well.
I'd love to have the statement that explains in a sentence what SACOG does. I don't think that actually explains it to the person on the street. And that's my personal standard for what a mission statement ought to do.
Mr. Chair, I have
Sorry, I'm reading.
No, it's okay. I have a quick question. I mean, Director Sander, appreciate your statement or your questions and statement raising this. I mean, do you have suggested language? I mean, for a, sort of a transportation themed mission statement? I appreciate hearing that if you do.
I think you would have to put something in there. I'm not going to wordsmith it well, but SACOG convenes and connects the region around transportation issues to advance equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's helpful.
Any others? Mr. Stollard, you're awfully quiet today.
There's a reason for that.
Okay.
Actually, I'm quite content. A lot of work has gone into this. I've always felt these are things that can be beaten to death and become animals designed by committees. So at some point, I feel like you have to say we've really thought about it. The exercise itself is really part of what it's all about. We've been through the exercise over the course of a year. We're in the 14th round. I'm content at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'll weigh in and just to kind of agree with Mr. Saylor, and that's that, you know, I like the fact that it's somewhat broad, because it's clear from just this very brief 3-page document that I think has been well thought out and been a lot of people, a lot of comments and input from, you know, for various committees and members. But if you look at what our priorities are, you would have to be blind not to see that transportation is clearly one of the priorities we have, because it's outlined in pretty much all of them. It's in some way. So I will just weigh in on my opinion of, I think I'm agreeing with you, Don. And that's that, you know, I like the way it's written now, and that if we specifically put transportation in there, then what about land use? Because we're not just about, when we talk about land use, we're not just talking about transportation. You know, when we talk about things like our arena numbers for the region, and you know, sure, transportation is a major part of what we do, but if we're going to spell out transportation directly in the mission statement, I think it limits the scope of what the organization does. That was a very long way of saying I agree.
Chair Kennedy, if I could, Director Sander, as you know, appreciate your question, right? Because I think many people come to SACOG believing we're a transportation agency 100%, starting there and ending there. And that's understandable, because most of the tools that we have, the funding that we have, the devolution of federal and state authority and funding comes through sort of traditional transportation programs, which was not always the case. And, you know, we have to be mindful and use that influence eye to make sure it remains the case and our devolution of that doesn't go backwards and flow back up to the state and federal level. Having said that, though, one of the reasons, in addition to every local government sits around this table twice a month, that I think this is a very unique and special agency, is because going all the way back to the blueprint, and I don't think I have to convince many of you of that, which, as I understand it, I hope I'm telling the story right, came about because looking at the long-term, well, maybe a lawsuit started part of it, but also looking at the long-term future of this region back in the early 2000s, simply focusing on transportation was getting us into a whole bunch of trouble. It was getting us into air quality issues. It was getting us into leapfrog development, loss of farmland, right? And so it begins with land use. In fact, the first workshop of this year for the board, I think the title was, "It Begins with Land Use," or something like that. That is not to say that we want local land use authority. I understand how much that is a third rail, but it is to say that if we don't understand the type and the phasing of jobs and housing and growth and development, we will never be able to catch up with enough transportation investment, right? If we don't wrap our arms around growth and development, which all of you as 28 local governments are in charge of. And so herein a little bit lies the problem, which is I don't believe we're a transportation agency. And if we start thinking that that's all we do, we will have forgotten the lessons we have learned the last 20 years. That's not, and the intention, again, the intention was to clearly call that out under priorities and put this whole thing together. And I would understand when you see mission and vision, you're thinking, hey, where's the bread and butter? Where's the transportation component of that, which is why those 4 priorities are articulated the way they are.
Mr. Executive Director, if I could interrupt for a moment. You know, you showed the bylaws from 2004. I mean, that SACOG was a successor agency to a crisis that occurred to its predecessor, the SRAPC, the Sacramento Area Regional Planning Commission. And that whole idea that we were a planning agency was so disturbing that Placer County and El Dorado County withdrew from the council. And then everybody went to their corners. And I would say we have been working our way back over the succeeding 20 years, but we realized that this is very sensitive and we've done it very carefully. And we've hopefully brought everybody along, and we'll continue to do that. But we are more than a transportation agency. These things are interrelated. And I do think we need to stay broad in our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Tom, thank you for the journey back in the Wayback Machine there. That's actually some history I'm unaware of. I'd be interested in learning more about that.
My law partner, when he, as a Woodland City Councilman, was chairman of SRAPC, so we lived it.
Wow, maybe I need to look in the B archives or something, but if they covered it. But you know, I'm okay with this mission statement. I just needed to voice my, you know, personal opinion. And you know, transportation is represented in every one of the goals listed. So it's if someone looks beyond the mission statement, hopefully it'll be somewhat obvious what we do.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just one other quick, I do, you know, Director Sander, I do really appreciate, first, I appreciate this discussion sort of in its entirety, but I do, you know, I do appreciate you raising that particular item, because I mean, if you look at our sort of existing mission statement, it does, you know, call out transportation, but it also talks about, you know, integrated regional planning as well too. And I mean, among addition to quality of life and such, and you know, it's a lot longer of a mission statement. It's a lot, I would say, frankly, more convoluted. I think this new version is frankly much more eloquent. Maybe not as, you know, direct in terms of, again, calling out transportation explicitly, but I think it's to your really good point. I think, you know, transportation is really well fleshed out in each of the, you know, major sort of goals beneath it though. So I know it's not, you know, sort of doesn't explicitly call it out in the mission statement itself, but I think compared to the very lengthy and frankly somewhat convoluted existing mission statement that I'm not sure any of us could sort of recall or recite, you know, easily. I think this is actually an upgrade. So I appreciate the opportunity to make a couple comments.
Thank you. Any others? All right, Mr. Corliss. Any follow-up?
I think that was helpful. Again, the idea would be to bring the draft plan. If you have any further comments, you're thinking about it, it's keeping you up tonight, and you're just, you know, you let me know. Let us know. We'll think about that, bring it to the full board September 15th at your September board meeting, and then it will come through the committee process in October for adoption.
Okay. All right.
So did you want us to call you if we're up late?
Yeah, absolutely. As I always do. As I always do.
All right, then.
Phone lines are open.
Not hearing any others, that is our final information item. And James has clearly spelled out what the process coming up is. Our next meeting as a committee is December 5th at 1 o'clock. James, do you foresee that being in person, hybrid, or at this point you don't know?
At this point, I don't know, but I do foresee the question of the hybrid versus in-person versus remote meetings actually on that agenda for you all to weigh in for next year. Okay. And I just say that because we know that it's incredibly helpful and flexible to be able to Zoom into these meetings. But I think we'll huddle internally as staff. We may have a proposal for you maybe about how to balance it out so that we have enough of you at some in-person meetings next year, because we do think that's going to be That's going to be valuable. And perhaps we have some of the committee meetings maybe that are largely remote, and we just kind of plan for that. But anyway, we'll give you some options for next year. And we've got a few months to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you. If no board member has any other comments or questions, then we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.